So we're just coming on to our last presentation now, and basically I've discovered since I've been in government for the last 10 months that actually government rebrands faster than a sort of a VC-backed biotech. And the latest rebranding we've got, and we have a great pleasure to welcome Miles Carroll from Public Health England. He will explain a lot more about what Public Health England is, but I believe it is what we used to know as the Health Protection Agency. But welcome, and this is our last presentation before I do the summing up. But we're very interested to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. So, yeah, some of you may have known what Health Protection England was. We are in charge, if you like, in ensuring the health of the UK, mainly in microbiology aspects. We're recently, from 1st of April, all pulled together with aspects of addiction, alcoholism, obesity, diabetes, etc., all under one big public health umbrella called Public Health England. We did think that was too sort of England focused, so we suggested Public Health UK, but the acronym wouldn't have been too good, I shouldn't think. So what I'll do in the next 10 minutes is just give you a real whistle-stop tour of the work that we do, the translational research work that we do at Porton Down, where I'm head of research with a group of 250 people, and we focus on infectious diseases, on vaccine research, therapeutics, new antimicrobials, new antivirals, also new diagnostic techniques and decontamination approaches as well, and ways to advise government, the health service, in how to cut down on hospital-acquired infections, etc. So we know that things have changed somewhat in drug development, in vaccine development. And obviously, you all know that this is a picture going back in time to 1796, when things are a little bit simpler, when you could use an observation that milkmaids don't get cowpox on their fingers, don't get smallpox because their complexion stays good. So that's your research arm done. Then you take a product that nature has made, the cowpox pustule from Sarah Nelm's hand, and then you experiment on your gardener's son by doing a clinical trial and then challenging with live smallpox. So we heard this morning that things have changed for much the worse in some ways, but the better in others because of obviously considering ethics and safety. But it's a minefield now and a huge cost for industry-developed products. We know, though, that the markets are there, so the pull is there, but the model's changed, and Big Pharma is obviously in license so much more. It's shutting down a lot of its R&D capability, and it's outsourcing that R&D. And actually, we work a lot with Big Pharma at Porton Down in many aspects of product development, utilising the very expensive capabilities that we have that are there for the UK for an emergency response capability. So, obviously, things need to change. We need to accelerate drug development, vaccine development, and we've had a lot of experience at Porton Down in working with the SMEs and Big Pharma in developing vaccines and drugs in the past. And here's a list of those that aren't just sort of in development, they're on the shelf, they're improving public health for the UK, and they're also bringing revenues to UK companies and also the UK tax department. So what's unique about us is that we have an integrated translational research capability built from historical reasons, also emergency response capabilities, and we can go from discovery, we can identify new antigens for vaccines, we can work with chemistry companies and find new drugs as antibiotics, but we concentrate where our specialization is, and that is in vivo modeling for infectious diseases. So we can work from anything from a mouse up to non-human primates. We look after the non-human primate capability for the UK. Both breeding facilities are down in Porton Down. We have the most advanced infectious disease modelling in the UK, if not Europe. And all these capabilities are there, available to SMEs to work with us in partnership in drug development. We also do process development, manufacturing, and do a lot of clinical trials as well. And we believe, well, the Office of Life Sciences' own words, we're a key asset to the UK Life Science Initiative. And so why do we do this? We're not subsidising drug development. The companies we work with, SMEs we work with, either we pull grants in with them, and that's fully funded. It improves our expertise and capability in case we need to respond to infectious disease emergencies as well. And there's examples where, for example, an SME came to us with a new technology for influenza vaccine development, didn't know which one to fund to go into the clinic with, for it made GMP material. We took its two variants of that vaccine, put it into non-human primates, where we can parallel the immunology in NHPs that you can do in the clinic, and gave them the answer of which one they should progress, which probably saved them £2 million in a subsequent dual clinical trial that they may have had to do. We also work with academia when they have early stage ideas but not enough critical mass of data to be able to generate funding opportunities either from VCs or to out-license. And we work with other government departments in the UK and also international governments and not-for-profit organisations as well, in helping them to develop products that have an impact on public health but also have a financial advantage for the UK as well. A quick overview of the work that they're involved with. You can see that it's all the regular nasties from TB to Clostridium difficile to meningitis and pertussis, a lot of technology development around diagnostics, and then we have a large interest in medical countermeasures, emerging diseases and biothreat agents, and we can then also help you evaluate your new products against new pathogens as they emerge. Example, the novel coronavirus that came out of the Middle East, we can help you assess the efficacy of your product against that if you have a new antiviral or a new vaccine, and also H5N1 as well, because these are expensive capabilities to maintain, and we should be duplicating all over the country. We should be sharing our specialist equipment and expertise with you guys. So a lot of our work is around animal modelling, and we know there's a stepwise approach in the evaluation in drug development and vaccines, and usually people start with mice because they're relatively inexpensive, a lot of reagents there, and the ethical barriers are somewhat lower. And as you move up the animal kingdom, the ethical issues increase, also the costs increase, and the expertise required increases dramatically as well. And the difference between us, say, not insulting academic group, but we develop animal models that support licensure. So we can carry out studies to FDA or EMEA standards. We also provide data that allows US government to license its product through what's known as the animal rule, which the FDA instigated in about 8 years ago to enable them to license products not through standard phase 3 efficacy studies, but through non-human primate challenge models. This is just an example of how we work internationally in evaluating different products and working out which one's the best, so investment can be made for them to go into the clinic. We are the world's biggest TB vaccine evaluator because we developed all these models to such a high standard. Everybody accepts that there's none better in the world, and we can give an independent view on which one should take investment in going to the clinic. Tested over 200 preclinical vaccines, and a number of them have progressed to the clinic because they've reached certain benchmarks. And of the 13 new TB vaccines that have gone into the clinic, 8 of them were tested by my department because of their unique modelling capability. Okay, so you able to move that on from up there? So there was a maybe escape and come out. Can you do the escape up there, or should I do it? What did it say? Oh, there we go.
Okay.
If we go.
I don't think the videos are working.
Okay, so this is an example of how we've worked with clinical teams. I don't want to push it again in case it gets jammed again, but these are the lungs of non-human primates, so we can properly evaluate disease burden. So we can really say if one vaccine is better than another. So the government knows, or venture capitalists know, or the Gates Foundation know which vaccine to put in the clinic and which ones to kill. There was a discussion earlier, which ones, how do we know which products to kill early? And really, if you've got an authentic animal model that isn't being manipulated by anyone who has a bias and wants it to work, that's probably a good way to kill things before you embark on GMP and manufacture and invest millions for clinical evaluation for them only to fail there. And this is another example of the costs of taking things from mice into man. If you had a really interesting flu vaccine or a flu antiviral, for example, and wanted to get to a point where you actually had efficacy data in humans, great, you can do human challenge models, which are fantastic ways to accelerate development of infectious disease therapeutics and vaccines. But it's going to cost you over £4 million to work out if your product actually has efficacy against flu. Now, that's quite a high investment risk to make if you're a VC, or even if you're a government granting agency. However, if you use a non-human primate model, they're not humans, but they're very, very close to, and give you pretty accurate information of what's going to work. It costs you about 5% of that. So we believe that it's definitely worth using and investing in effective animal models before you invest heavily into a clinical stage of your product. This is an example in the area of bacterial vaccines, where there are still many things to be developed. We've worked with an array of biotech companies and big pharma and academic groups in the race to make an effective Men-B vaccine. We've used the MRC Pathway Development Scheme, now obviously moved into biocatalysts as well, and we get significant funding from people like GSK and Sanofi Pasteur for development of vaccines, research for those guys as well. And we're also able to put SMEs together with major pharma when we have done the work independently, and we also have highlighted this with permission from the SME to the pharmaceutical company. We've pulled in, this is a bit out of date now, well over $60 million from the US government over the last 5-6 years, mainly in the area of emerging diseases and biothreat agents. This has given us a huge amount of expertise that we've for the UK, and again, this enables a lot of SMEs who would not have thought their products had to have efficacy against biothreat or emerging diseases to test their efficacy, get some initial data, and with our contacts, go back to US government sources for subsequent funding. This is just a summary of some of the products that we are working on at the moment in the therapeutics, vaccines, and diagnostics area. And the blue colour denotes those projects that are partially or entirely funded by a third party, being an SME or a pharmaceutical company or a grant funding body or another government. And the red ones are the ones that we've actually partnered with SMEs who have taken to their Biocatalyst Fund, and obviously we hope they're going to be successful. This is just a summary then of the organisations that we've worked with or currently working with in developing new drugs and therapeutics to improve UK public health, but also to stimulate the life sciences sector for UK industry. And that one I'll stop. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Miles. Some critically important work, not only to the sufferers of those dreadful conditions, but also, very important for the UK economy. And I think we'll leave this slide up, just showing sort of the breadth of international input and investment in that R&D while we talk. I think because we started 5 minutes late, I've allowed 5 minutes, to finish 5 minutes late as well. And thank you for nodding for that. Rather than me conclude, I'd rather sort of open up the floor really to see if anyone's got any questions. We have some microphones around. Please identify who you are if you've got a question. But I think, what we've seen is the whole breadth of how the government is trying to change the life science sector here in the UK, not only for patient benefit, but also to bring inward investment into the UK. And first question there, and please could we have your name and where you're from? Thank you.
Sharon Bingham, Huntingdon Life Sciences. It's really directed to the sort of first two speakers. It seemed to me that there's quite a lot of overlap between the advice that some of these bodies offer. I mean, some of you seem to offer advice, some of you offered access to the NHS, others advice and funding. How do I, as a naive academic or an SME, how do I know the best place to get the advice I need to actually progress my potential medicine?
Very good question. I shall throw that one straight over to Oliver, who can deconvolute all the acronyms and tell you exactly where to go and how to do this.
I guess I would say if your question is about research and it's about clinical trials and about designing clinical trials and enabling clinical trials, we Nocre are the right place to go. The AHSNs are a different beast, and I think Nick outlined what they do. They're very much local organizations. So I guess if you feel there's something that you want to do with a local company, you can go to your local AHSN. I think the key difference is that NIHR is all about clinical research, and AHSNs, in terms of the wider brief, is about uptake of innovation. So it's at a later stage of the adoption process. So if your question is about preclinical to clinical, if there's a research question that you want to address in patients, I would suggest you come to Nocre into the NIHR. If you have a wider issue about regulatory, about uptake, about how the different local NHS trusts operate, the AHSN is probably the better place to go and ask your question. But Nick may want to expand. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, what we're trying to do is not overlap. So if you went to Oliver and it wasn't for the NIHR, then he would know to pass you to the AHSN. Equally, I think there's a certain desire in the AHSNs that there are a lot of smaller companies who might not fit into the NIHR portfolio at the moment, but given a leg up from the AHSN, suddenly we'll get a lot more collaboration and development and acceleration through the leg up through the AHSNs to Oliver's organisation. So it doesn't matter which door you come in, you will end up with the right person because we are at least talking to one another.
So was the signposting clear there? Or,
Well, it sounds to me as if maybe I should go local first.
Yeah, go and see Karen. Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? We've got a bit of time here. I mean, I'll be forced to ask a question if nobody else is going to ask one. But, oh, yes. Question just here. Can we have a microphone, please?
Got a very playful question, and I'll probably get lynched on the way out. I was gonna sort of play with the cluster sort of idea. I mean, it's taken 50 years to build Cambridge as a cluster. I recognise hospitals are all over the place and they're very useful things, but for funding research in drug discovery, why on earth are we going anywhere apart from Cambridge, Oxford, and the M11 corridor?
Are you asking me this question?
Well, I'm asking it generally because, we're hitting the ground running, we want to keep the scientists in place. If we fund Averroes, if we fund Nottingham, for example, for goodness sake, take another 40 years for that to get up to the right critical mass.
Well, I'll maybe just have a quick word and then I'll hand over to Oliver. But I think from the UK-wide perspective, although I actually happen to live here, so I have a slight bias, but actually it's a UK-first policy. So there's some very good stuff outside Oxford and Cambridge in the M11 corridor, absolutely. And what we do is we look at functional capabilities. It's not just all about clusters. It's about where is somebody who has a key expertise to do something. And actually, academics and scientists are very collaborative. They've been working across, some great stuff going on in Dundee, for example. So it's not all down here. I'm sorry to, I'm sort of being a bit heretical. Maybe I'm going to get dragged off by Harriet very soon. But it's actually about how is the UK. I look at the UK as a supercluster. There's some great stuff going on here in Cambridge, great stuff in London, great stuff in Oxford, but there's also great stuff going across the rest of the UK. And we look at functional capability and where can that be done, how can that be achieved. And maybe, Oliver, you want to sort of comment more from the clinical angle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's, in terms of the Biomedical Research Centres, Cambridge is outstanding. And of course, you can do great things in Cambridge, you can do great things in Oxford. But like Mark says, everybody brings their own unique bit. I think from my point of view, what's where the NIHR comes in is really, and what we're about clinical trials. And with the best will in the world, if you want to run a well-designed early phase 2 proof of concept study where you need where you may need to do involved procedures, where you need to find exactly the right patients, maybe stratified patients, you simply don't find enough patients at one center. And so this is where we come in terms of Nocre, and what we do is we enable you to access the whole infrastructure and in particular areas like inflammation through the TRPs, let you do those clinical trials that you can't do anywhere else in the world when you work with a single center, whether it's Oxford, Cambridge, or whether it's Boston or San Francisco.
I've been slightly playful, but if you want to build a company in a region, you've got to hire staff. You've got to have staff, you've got to have the security to move to a certain area. And And I sort of agree with everything. If we had an infinite amount of money, I say yes. But if we have a finite amount of money, then I guess intuitively it sounds like we should be investing where there's already resources, or putting money into infrastructure so we can link these centres.
I think you make a good point. I mean, because we deal a lot with foreign companies. We have 100 embassies and consulates around the world who are constantly trying to persuade companies to either expand or set up in the UK. And been talking to a lot of US companies recently, and everyone thinks that Boston is the Nirvana where everything's happening. But I think in some of those key trials, they just can't recruit enough patients, for example, because there's just too much saturation. And actually what we have in the UK, which does actually weld us all together, and I know I'm banging on about this, but we've just had the 65th anniversary of the NHS, which is a UK-wide organisation. I know it's not organised UK-wide, but it actually has that heritage. It has that common interest in research. And actually we have the people trained in the same way to the same standards. And actually that gives us 62 million patients. Now, that's not big in global standards, but that's 62 million patients who have basically gone through the same system. That's something that the US can't do. How are you going to get, for God's sake, the Mayo Clinic to talk to Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston? It's going to be tough, right? I think that's something we can do. Clearly, some of the Scandinavian countries can do this, but they're much smaller. So I think, we're the right size to look at things like infectious diseases, rare diseases, because we have that common heritage. It's all about networking. I think in terms of that's how you get your research done. I think your other point is if you want to come and get a job in a small company, and small companies come and go, yes, I understand people might want to be in a cluster because they're not that mobile. They've got kids in school and things like that. So I do understand there's a cluster effect. But in terms of actually, research is actually becoming more mobile rather than less mobile. But, clearly when you get to a certain stage, my kids are beginning to leave home now, so maybe I can start to move. But there's a certain phase in your life when, you are probably wedded to a certain area and you're probably safe being in a cluster where you can get more jobs. Yeah, and, places like Boston, are good for that, and places like Cambridge here are also good for that. Maybe one more question, or should we... we've got one more question, and then I'm going to hand over to Harriet. There's a gentleman... is that you, Alan? I can't see you in the... So it's my old former Pfizer colleague, Alan Marchion's going to ask a very insightful question.
I know my questions are always like that, Mark, but I don't think this one is particularly. It's really for the Academic Health Science Network guys at the front. And one of my questions is with the commissioning, the change in commissioning and the way that the NHS is run, aren't the academic health science networks actually competitive with each other in terms of innovation and differentiating themselves? Because aren't the GPs going to want to go to the best trust that's available? And so they have choices. And so the ones that's the most innovative are the ones where the GPs are going to go for. And so this actually breaks up the system rather than bringing it closer together.
No, I mean, the CCGs are more seeing the Academic Health Science Network as a source of information and coordination so that everybody gets the same level of care, whether you live in Skegness or in the centre of Nottingham. So rather than everybody sending them to just one place, it's actually making sure the care's the same.
So if you're a GP in Peterborough, maybe just on the boundary between East Midlands and the East, aren't you going to, as a GP, going to think, where can I get the best care for this patient at the same price? And therefore, you're going to look towards Cambridge or you're going to look towards Nottingham. And I would advocate they're going to probably look towards Cambridge.
That happens already. There's a kind of southward drift of patients from Peterborough across Northamptonshire to Oxford and Cambridge anyway, away from Leicester and Nottingham. So and it tends to go with where people trained, oddly enough, rather than.
So you don't think it's going to change anything?
I think it might. It's going to change things on a local level. So where you've got differentials in care, so COPD care in Leicester is actually quite exceptional, but if you're cared for out of Lincolnshire, you don't do so well.
Okay.
Why is that? Well, actually, there are several things you could put in place, and that's what the HSN can do and can facilitate and help the CCGs get there. But that's kind of the right-hand end of the innovation pathway. Okay. I'm more talking the left-hand end here, where we're talking about new developments and new discoveries.
All right. Thank you. Sorry, Mark, it wasn't that insightful.
Well, it was actually. You're challenging government policy, so I think we should just stop the conversation there now.